Hello, everyone. So a very good morning to all of you who are in Europe and who are in Asia. A very good afternoon. So today we are excited to begin the thematic webinar for the school collaboration, STEM education through education for sustainable development on the topic climate change education and its significance today. Let's see what's in our agenda today. So today we will be having the presentation in two parts. So part one will introduce you to, the introduction and overview of climate change. And part two will particularly talk about significance of climate change education, especially at the secondary education level. And then we will have a question and answer session and a group discussion together with this speaker. So we have three brilliant speakers today. Our very own Ms. Grażyna Polowaska. She's Associate Director at the Governance and Sustainable Development at Asia Euro Foundation. And Ms. Grażyna joined the Asia Euro Foundation in 2010. And she is a strong advocate for sustainable development, and she advocates for policies that promote sustainable development at an intergovernmental level. And then for part two, we have Dr. David Krelin and Mr. Joshua Wright from ScienceScope. And David is the founder and CEO of ScienceScope, and Josh, he's the software engineer at ScienceScope. And together, both of them is really trying their best to advocate for issues like climate change education, education for sustainable development, and innovating teaching and learning practices through the use of innovative technology and at the K-12 level mainly. So you will be having a great session together with these three speakers later. Let's first, talk about why are we talking about climate change education. If you remember, when you applied for our project, you participated in a survey on climate change education, and this is the result for those of you who confirmed to participate in this project, not everyone who applied. So you can see that 40% of you shared that you know a lot about climate change and can explain it very well. So we are hoping that you can empower other educators who do not have a clear idea about climate change. And in this category, so 42% of you mentioned that you know about climate change, but you cannot explain really well. So we hope that from today's session, you can learn about climate change and climate change education and really enhance your understanding on the topic. And 7% of you talked about, you know a little about climate change, and 3% of you know nothing about climate change and willing to learn more. So today's session is mainly for you, and we hope that you can really take away some strong points. And regarding climate change education, 59% of you mentioned that you actually have heard about climate change, and 41% of you mentioned that you have actually never heard of climate change education. So for your background information, climate change education is a new topic, although we have been hearing about climate change. Climate change education, this term have been recently introduced, and now education policymakers and platforms like ASAP ClassNet project is addressing these issues, and it's really important that we integrate it to promote sustainable development through education. So this is where I stop, and I'm going to hand over the platform to our first speaker for part to Ms. Grażyna Polowaska. So please, Ms. Polowaska, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Very good morning and very good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure who has children in the background, but if you happen to have children in the background, if you could mute yourself, that would be fantastic. I hope you can see my slides and everything is okay. And having said that, I would like to thank my colleagues from the education department for the excellent introduction. It is my second time when I have a pleasure to join this program and meet amazing participants that want to make a difference and then get educated and educate others about climate change, sustainable development, but also all the global issues that are touching our lives more and more nowadays. And having said that, Okay. I just would like to start with 3 learning questions. What would be guiding questions for this presentation? One is to look into the different vocabulary that is very often used when we are talking about climate change, which is related to greenhouse effect, climate change, and global warming. And depending on who is talking and for what purpose, sometimes those terms get mixed up. So I just also wanted to know what is your level of expertise regarding the familiarity with those terms. And then look a little bit on the issues related with the proof. What is the proof that climate change is happening and why it is happening, which is also related with the previous points. So before I will go into the details, I would like to warmly invite you to type the answers in the chat when we can look at what is the difference between greenhouse effect, climate change, and global warming. So we can have a bit of warm-up that we can see also from your side. What are the notions that you already have in mind? What is clear, what is not clear, because depending on your level of expertise, I can go more general or I can go into more detailed things depending on what is today on the agenda. I do not see anybody writing anything, so if you can just start, that would be helpful. Or alternatively, I'm not quite sure how open are organizers. We can also allow you to unmute yourself, I believe, because there's not so many people in the room. Okay, I can see someone broke the ice already with the greenhouse effect. Excellent. If you feel like talking, you are more comfortable with talking, please unmute yourself and also you are able to speak.
Hello.
Hello.
I am Anca from Romania. Yeah, I'm not very sure I can make a clear difference between greenhouse effect, climate change, and global warming, but I would say that greenhouse effect has something to do with the ozone layer. And a very humid, I don't know, atmosphere. Like we have classrooms and we say, okay, this is like a greenhouse effect here, where it's not very easy to breathe inside because of too many people to enclosed space. Yeah, climate change, I would say difference in temperatures with, I don't know, storms and hurricanes and too high or too low and producing different effects. And global warming, in my mind, global warming was a bit related to climate change, like not necessarily that the temperatures rise, but maybe the temperature also in oceans, and which leads, like this global warming leads to disappearance or endangering different species of fish and ecosystems.
Thank you so much for being so courageous and speaking up. I also would like to thank everybody that also were courageous to write on the chat. As you can see on the chat, there are different level of details and different level of approaches. And then in general, all those issues are interconnected. So my objective today is also to clean a little bit the vocabulary that we are using, because very often, especially when there are different type of debate or you are talking with different groups and students, you might come across different kind of preconceived notions about what certain things mean, and also regarding to related to proof and how do we actually measure that something is happening. So my objective here is a little bit to highlight the definition, but also explain this in the context of political discussions, because in the end of the day, it is affecting us all. As I can see, everybody has something to say about those issues, and I hope this discussion will be going on. And if you have any specific questions or something is not clear, please let me know. And I think I have too many things open on my computer, so I'm not that great with sharing. Okay, so there is issue of climate change. So when we are looking at the overall discussion, what we are talking about, there is this whole discussion that because of human activity, but because also of natural situation, the climate is changing. And then a lot of reasons are put on humans, but also a lot of reasons are naturally occurring processes. But when you look at how it has been changing over the last 100 years, you can see that apart from natural disasters that are happening, pretty much we can quite confidently take some responsibility for those occurring changes that are happening. So this is also why I wanted to show this in the historical context. And then in general, the ongoing discussion that is highly political and highly sensitive, especially for some countries, is related with so-called fossil fuels, and especially now in the context of geopolitical situation, and especially we are all affected, but also especially Europe regarding the situation with Russia and the supply of the gas. We are looking at changing dynamic of how the energy mix will be looking at and how we will be able to manage the CO2 emissions that are contributing to the climate change. And then when we are looking at climate change, so this is also something that is very dynamic. So especially nowadays, apart from energy, the other factors that are contributing to climate change are related with so-called feeding the world and food security overall, which means when we are looking at the farming, especially animal production, and cutting the forests to make sure that there is sufficient agricultural land, as well as electricity that is needed to fuel all those farms. This is also something that is both affected and contributing to climate change, meaning that there is a lot of pollution that is generated by livestock and in general agricultural and food supply chains. But at the same time, agricultural processes are very sensitive to the changes in weather patterns, to the drought, to the floods, and the more we actually are trying to intensify the food production and agriculture, the more we are contributing to long-term changes that are resulting in climate change. And then in general, what climate change or what we are looking at when we are talking about climate change, it is long-term changes, which means even though there are certain activities that are altering the existing weather patterns, when we look at the long-term alteration, then this is something that we consider and we talk about as climate change. And then greenhouse effect, I will not go here because I think this is pretty much straightforward. And I saw a lot of excellent answers already in the chat, which is, as some people already mentioned, and also Anka, I think, was saying that it is related to our earth and gases being trapped as if we were in the greenhouse, which means we are heating each other up. The more gases we produce, the more we heat each other up. And then sun is, of course, very active because this is also not partly natural process that we are very much reinforced with our activities. And then there is this approach, or when we are talking about, oh, this is not so bad, it has been always like this, why there is so much fuss about those discussions. It is related with the fact that concentration of the gases is altering ozone layer, but also it's heating up the planet. and also heating up the temperature, which in longer term is altering the weather patterns. And then it can, and usually does, result in climate change related phenomenon. And then when you are like looking, what are the general culprits? So when we are looking at the historical emissions, because I started in 1800, of course, the countries that were very early industrialized, such as United States, but even those that were later joining are catching up very fast, like Japan and China, and also India. So basically all the countries that are relying very heavily on the energy and are very heavily industrialized, and also are producing a lot, are those that are contributing to the fossil fuels, then CO2 emissions, and then to the greenhouse effect that is further on warming up the planet and result in climate change. So when we are looking at those countries, it is also, for political reasons, very sensitive topic, which means that the debate that is happening on the international fora is very much looking at who is actually responsible for climate change, who is responsible for destroying this fragile balance that we have with nature. And then you might look at the historic emissions, and then you have the so-called leaders that have been contributing quite heavily for many decades. And then you have new countries that are developing, that are just joining the race. And then they are not that, they don't have that much pollution that they produced, but at the same time, they are the ones that are very often pointed at and told to stop polluting. Oh, because you are growing, but you should stop polluting. Because when you look at the global carbon footprint, the countries that have the lowest CO2 emissions are the countries that are least developed. So when you look at Laos, for example, in Asia, when you look at Cambodia, when you look at the neighbors that are not particularly strong in the in different type of industry, all those countries are having very little to do with CO2 emissions, but they are also one of those that are very strongly affected because they are strongly relying on agriculture, and then any changes in the patterns and natural disasters are strongly affecting them. But I'm pretty sure my colleagues will further go deeper into those topics. So here, I think you all pretty much mentioned this when there was a chat, quite detailed. It was quite a detailed description from your side. And for me, the purpose behind this presentation is mostly to sort those notions, because especially when you are talking with young people, those terms can get mixed up, because greenhouse gas itself doesn't cause climate change. It is over extended period of time. When we do affect climate patterns, then there's climate change. So like one thing is connected to the other, and they are all interrelated and they strengthen each other. But then there is specific correlation that exists between them. And I think this is second time the same. Okay, and then when we are looking at the trends in the temperature, we are talking a lot, or you can also read in a lot of, in many newspapers, about this battle to keep the global warming below 1.5 Celsius. What does it actually mean? We are looking at this in the long-term perspective, because global warming, which means that the temperature increases, the combined land surface, air and sea surface, temperature overall keeps rising. And then it is, of course, caused by greenhouse effect. And it is, of course, caused by pollution that is contributing to that one. But then over extended period of time, usually Earth naturally has a capacity to regulate the temperature. But if we do not give it a break, it is basically rising. So when in ASEF we have been doing the research recently that was looking into different policies and countries' pledges, how they are going to work towards making sure that this global warming doesn't exceed 1.5 degrees. A lot of countries put different type of declarations that were not followed by specific policy actions. And while, for example, when you look at the European Union, there are overall coordinated policies and penalties for different activities that countries are doing, and if they are not complying with the international agreements. Not everywhere everything is organized or even controlled to such extent. So there are countries, as you know, that have a lot to say about Paris Agreement. They have a lot to say about the need for the growth and development versus the responsibility or the debt for the previous emissions. So if the issue was so easy as just to stop polluting, we would have done that. But it is much deeper than that, and it also has social consequences. And then in general, one thing I wanted to also that you can pay attention to is that climate change is also naturally occurring phenomenon. It is not just because we pollute or there are gases trapped that it is creating the long-term alteration to the weather patterns. It is in general something that is occurring also due to solar activities, which can be to some extent prevented. It is also related, you also were writing on this on the chat, it is related in general what is happening around Earth and outside our planet. But at the same time, for many years, it was also very difficult for scientists to prove that there is connection between human activities and climate change because it was naturally occurring phenomenon. So here I just wanted to put just three definitions together that are looking at the greenhouse effect, global warming, and climate change, because they are all interrelated. And I hope by now, like, you are all quite familiar with this. And I can see, yes, there were excellent responses on the chat as well. And I think I'm just maybe probably stating the obvious because there's no questions. And then I just wanted to say, who is the guilty party? And then the interesting part that maybe it's for some of you are familiar with that, maybe not all of you, is related with the fact that the biggest CO2 emitters are, of course, major oil producing countries that are generally that have generally very small population. This is why they are so heavy. Like when we look at the overall volume. However, when we look at the very much more populated countries as United States, Australia, and Canada, which are also highly developed, they are not shy of actually contributing more because overall there is more people. So when you look at this per capita emission, it is something that is showing. And as the beauty of statistics shows, usually it always depends on what do you want to prove. If you want to prove who is the biggest polluter, then you can make data to make your point. If you want to prove what country has the biggest pollution per capita, you can also make your point. So I also think if you are conducting classes or like educating people, this is very interesting to have a look. I have been quoting different sources here, Our World in Data, but also Gap Finder, and then another one that is Carbon Brief that you will also have after that, because all those websites have actually a lot of interactive statistics that can show different ways of how you can look at the issue. And then what really causes climate change apart from the pollution? So it is in general, this is in general priority areas that were taken from policy documents. So this is not scientists that prepared this. This is how countries are showing their statistics. Every couple of years, the country has to submit nationally determined contribution. That means they make commitment on how they are going to contribute to reduce climate change or reduce CO2 emissions. And then this is what is like the highest contributor. And when we are looking at this food production and nutritional security, and given the fact that this data has been collected before pandemic, I'm pretty sure that now the numbers are much higher, are the most affected. And then when we are looking at different things that are connected to it, it's of course human health that is affected by this, and then different types of natural resources. And then what can you do? Or what would you like to do? Or what could you do if you would like to look into certain global processes? Because I think depending on your own, you might already know like what can be done in your local organization or in the bigger network that you are working on. But when you look at the different political processes, the biggest one is related with United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that governments are meeting yearly with the exception of pandemic that for 1 year they haven't met. And then this was also absorbed by the 2030 agenda that was looking at global goals, also known as Sustainable Development Goals and Climate Action SDG 13. So here you can see different correlations between different UN processes, but also if you are very much interested in how and where certain decisions were made, who provided the report, what is trade, what is carbon trading, how you would like to see what can be done on the bigger level. I highly encourage you to also see our publication, but also look at the Road Through Paris that was looking into reduction of the emission and different organizations calling for different changes in our consumption and production patterns, because in the end of the day, it is on us to make the decision. And but it is not that easy because citizens alone cannot make such a big shift. It has to be connected with the political will, and also overall situation is influencing different discussions. So for all of you that are interested into more how the political processes work, what is happening at the COPs specifically. This year there will be COP in Egypt. Last year it took place in Glasgow. And it is quite interesting because for climate-related discussions, this is the process that has been taking place since quite some time. It's one of the well-known processes when governments voluntarily meet and discuss and try to make commitment to see how the challenges that are related with climate change can be tackled. And also what happen, and also you can see what happens if there is not enough political push or not enough will or not enough drama happening in the world, when it is how difficult it is for the governments to commit, because those commitments come at the price. Like how do you convert your whole energy production if it used to be, for example, based on coal to green energy? How do you make sure that people actually during winter have heating if there is not enough sun and there is not enough alternatives, or the buildings are not green, and so on and so forth. So this all is being discussed, and everybody can contribute here and there. At the moment, the biggest discussion is going around money, usually. So when we are looking at the upcoming COP, so of course the priority is given to keep the global average temperature below 1.5 degrees, and then look at the strategies to adapt, but also be more resilient to the effects that are related with that. And then look into the financial flows, which is also related with difficult decisions such as climate tax, carbon tax, producer space, different type of levies that can be used, then different industries that don't have any levies. For example, there were plans to put levies on airline industry, but now, as we know, after pandemic, when they are barely struggling, I think the probabilities that this will happen are quite low. So there are different ideas how we can make it work. Usually by finding money somewhere else or collecting money. And however, even when we look at all the Sustainable Development Goals, climate-related challenges or problems are actually quite well financed, in the sense that there is quite sufficient at this stage momentum, I think I would call it, that industries and also governments are pushing forward, making sure that we do not destroy the planet we are living on. Also because we crossed a couple of tipping points when you look at the different data related to biodiversity, pollution, and so on and so forth. And in the long term, it is actually affecting human health and has irreversible. It creates irreversible damage to the world we are living in. So I have big hopes for the COP. In general, as with all the political debates, in the end of the day, we shall see what will happen. But Paris was already a huge change in the approach. We stopped talking about things like, oh, there is no climate change. Why are so at least those facts or scientific facts were acknowledged. And there is no longer discussion about the things that whether there is a climate change, but there's a discussion, okay, how we keep it at bay with the innovation, solutions, different type of approaches, different type of policies, but also looking at the long-term lifestyle changes. The most trending, ASEF is based in Singapore, so like Singapore is usually trying to be the most innovative country in Asia, in the sense that there is a lot of funding given to research and science. So in Singapore, for example, alternative protein is now boosting, as that tastes like meat, but has nothing to do with meat production, and it is like produced in the laboratory. So I'm looking forward to see what will happen next, because human mind doesn't have any limits to what they can create. So the same way that damages can be done, I also believe that solutions can be found. And that's what I would like to finish with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grażyna Polowaska, for such an informative presentation on climate change and different trends and issues that we all really need to be aware of, especially as educators who are trying to teach the next generation about climate change. So I hope that our participants really found it useful, and then they can use this knowledge as they embark on the action learning phase to design innovative teaching and learning practices with climate change issues in mind. Now we move on to the part 2 of today's presentation, which is delivered by Science Scope, Dr. David Krellin and Mr. Joshua Wright from Science sciences scope. So they will talk more about the significance of climate change education at the secondary education level. And as they come from UK, they will talk about important issues and the significance mainly from the UK perspective. And hopefully you'll get to know a little bit more about different innovative teaching practices that address climate change. So with that, I hand over to Josh and David. Please feel free to share your screen, and the platform is yours.
Hi, so as just mentioned, my name is Josh and I work for Science Scope as a software engineer, but I also help out a lot with training and some of the creating of the resources for teachers and other learning materials and some of the digital making and things like that that we do. So as discussed, we're going to be talking about the climate change education at the secondary level and also some of the things that you can look to do in your schools and some of the things that you can look to activities you can look to do. Now, first thing is the significance of the importance of climate change education at the secondary level. So to help bring in change, you always need to educate the younger generation so they can bring new ideas and ways of thinking into the working world to solve problems and pass on knowledge to the next generation. Teaching awareness and understanding of climate change. The enabling of students to have the knowledge and awareness about the impacts of climate change that enables them to make key decisions in their lives and help to drive innovation through technology or changes in lifestyle. Adapting to new lifestyles in education and at home. Giving them knowledge and understanding of how they can make a difference. This is not just something to do in schools, but also something that they can take home and share with family and friends. Giving students vital knowledge on what climate change may bring, preparing them for the future stages in their lives. Key experiences and getting them ready for climate change while giving them the ability to adapt and carry on learning going forward. Now, why is there such a push for climate change education at the moment? Now, here in the UK, there was a survey done in 2018, which surveyed just under 3,000 pupils across England. Some of them were in primary school in year 5 and 6, but it was also covered across all years of secondary school and also included sixth form. One of the things that I'm sure we can do and manage is also send links to these resources afterwards, so that way people can have a read through, look at other results and some of the other material that I'll be talking about in this presentation, and make sure that everyone has access to that as well. Now, some of the statistics from it are 68% are interested in learning more about the environment. And as we saw from the first presentation, that from the feedback as well from the participants, that this is all starting to kind of link in and come together, and especially with everyone here as educators and teachers, as well as what is the feedback from students as well. So we can see that a lot of people are interested in learning more about it. 85% agree that all schools and colleges should be encouraging and helping pupils like me to do things to help the environment. Just 4% of pupils surveyed feel that they know a lot about climate change. So this shows the importance of why we need to educate students and pupils, that only 4% from nearly 3,000 pupils felt that they knew about climate change, considering this is going to be really affecting them in their lives going forward. And 42% of young people aged 9 to 18 say they have learned a little, hardly anything, or nothing about the environment at school. Now, this does show that there is still some education going on. If 42% young people say they have learned a little, but a little isn't really enough. And that's where hopefully with these sessions that we'll be running, we'll be helping to provide everyone here with information to hopefully try and change those numbers going forward. And it's results from surveys like this that really help drive change, because it helps to show where there is a shortfall in education. It definitely shows that there is a shortfall in the UK on climate change education, and also helps to drive change going forward. Now, from some of this feedback, that the UK government have been enacting new policies and changes, and they've been setting themselves goals going forward. Now, one of the things that they've been setting out recently is the sustainability and climate change strategy. And what they've said is the strategy's vision is for the United Kingdom to be a world leading education sector in sustainability and climate change by 2030. Now, that's a very bold, strong claim that the UK government are making, but something that they are working towards achieving. And you can go to this link to see more about some of the things that they are wanting to do, some of the things they're going to target to do. And as I said earlier on, we'll make sure that we can send everyone out these resources for further reading going forward, so you can see what the UK government is hopefully planning. Now, one of the things as part of this strategy that they are launching in September 2025 is a natural history GCSE. And here are some quotes from the report that they sent out about what they are trying to do for their natural history GCSE. So, we are delivering a better, safer, greener world for future generations, and education is one of our key weapons in the fight against climate change. The entrepreneurial can-do spirit of this country makes me confident that we will win this fight. The new natural history qualification will enable young people to explore the world by learning about organisms and environmental and sustainability issues, and gain a deeper knowledge of the natural world around them. Now, even though it's called natural history, you'd kind of think, well, how does that tie in? And as they've mentioned here, it's also looking at the environmental and sustainability issues. So it's looking at climate change as a whole ecosystem. You know, yes, there is all like pollution, like what we're talking about from a lot of the oil producing countries. You know, that's one part of it. Yes, it is a major part, but it's also looking at what are the ecosystems that can change the world drastically. Like when you look at the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, you know, how that's having a drastic impact of the CO2 being pulled out of the atmosphere. And with that kind of those numbers dwindling, that the more we put in and the less is coming out, is creating exponential growth, which is driving forward this climate change and some of these rises in levels. And this is where the UK government is hopefully trying to target it, is creating well-rounded individuals with knowledge and understanding of these whole ecosystems and the way how these whole aspects work. Now, the next thing we're going to cover is some of the examples that here at ScienceScope that we've been working on internationally, but also here in the UK. So you don't always need to wait for governments, whether it's like your local or international organizations, to actually get going. You know, these are some of the things you can do now. Now, some of these examples I'm going to be covering did require some extra kind of kit with power monitoring, but there's also things you can do that you don't necessarily need to buy into some of these systems. There's manual ways of doing it. Now, one of the projects we've been working on recently was in a energy monitoring project in Bromley, in just south of London. And basically what we were looking at to do with schools and students is we were monitoring the indoor environment level. So looking at things like how warm is the room. And we're also then looking at power monitoring sensors. So how much gas and electric are they using? And with that, we were building analysis tools around that to look at, well, depending on the weather, what's your kind of energy usage? Are you wasting energy when people aren't in the room? We had CO2 sensors, which can measure occupancy of a room. So that way we can know if there's people in the room or not. And therefore you can work out, well, this room's being heated while there's no one in the room. That's a lot of waste of energy. If we can cut this energy usage, therefore there's less fossil fuels and all sorts of things being burned as a result of this wasted energy. Now, that's just also looking at the energy. Now, some of the other things that we were also producing was curriculum resources. And this was, how can students look and investigate and research how to reduce the energy usage? How do you work out if you're wasting energy? What can you do to save energy? What kind of activities there were? And as a result, this has a two-pronged approach. It's educating the students to help them reduce their usage. Also, as I mentioned earlier on, about educating students in the school environment, but also so they can take it home and apply what they've learned at school, but also apply what they've learned at home. So investigating what's been turned off, what's not been turned off. You know, should they go around every evening before bed and turn off what's not being used, like even turning off your TV? Individually, these things are quite small, but once you build it up and once everyone does it, there can be massive savings. And this also then links into the school making policy changes. So what can the school say and do to make changes to the school life? You know, whether it might add just a little bit of work or make things easier for everyone. It's some of these key things, and a change of the way of thinking can really help reduce energy usage. Now, there's multiple aspects of these kind of power monitoring investigations. Is analyzing your current usage, you know, what's kind of being left on, what needs to be left on. There'll always be certain situations, particularly in schools, where, you know, you've got emergency lighting systems, security systems, IT infrastructure that need to be left on all the time. But it's also looking at what other things are wasted. So computers being left on at the end of the day, other heating devices, you know, maybe if the school's not being heated, or it needs to be, the insulation needs to be improved because people are using electric heaters. What sort of devices are being used? So modern LEDs are very efficient versus old like halogen kind of like lights. So getting the school to invest in themselves, of upgrading to some of the new more efficient forms of consuming power with different things, can help reduce costs, but also reduce the energy, which is reaching climate change. So there's a lot of things where some people say, well, being environmentally friendly can cost you money, but actually in some situations there's no reason why it should. Yes, it might cost you a lot to invest, but that's where coming with a plan and how you can save money over time. And as mentioned before, it's just about changing habits. Now, in regards to activities that you can do with the students, you can look at gathering historic data. So any school will have a bill, depending on how you get billed, but you know, typically here in the UK you get a monthly bill, and that will show you what you've used. Now here in the UK we also have a lot of smart meters, so some of the energy suppliers, you can get data down to 30 minutes. So one of the things we actually did with a partner school is they sent us a massive Excel spreadsheet file that came from their energy supplier, which was 30 minutes data of how much energy they had been using all the way back till 2017 up till 2021. We processed that data, and as a result from that, we were able to look into where's their usage, what are they doing. As a result, we're going forward and hopefully looking to try and help them save money. And this is things without actually buying any hardware you can do within your schools. You can make a request to your school and ask for this data and start looking into it of, at night times, once the school is closed, how much energy are we using? Oh, this is a lot. There must be a load of devices left on. Right, kids, at the end of the day, we're going to go around the school as a bit of tutor or like a last lesson, and we're going to go around and take notes and see what's left on and turn stuff off and start turning stuff off. And then you look and see kind of, you know, how much is that saving you? What are the kind of improvements on that? And this also helps across cross-curriculum activities as well. And going more steps forward, you can then look into the weather data as well. So talking about climate change, the effects on weather, what does this mean? But also, how does the weather affect your energy usage? So when it's colder, do you consume more energy? You know, do you consume more gas, more electric? Do you burn more raw materials such as log fires? All sorts of things like that. And you can start to look into, well, you know, is there a correlation? And, you know, there might be, there might not be. What changes can be made? And this is where you can get students to investigate this. You can look at historic weather. You know, this is some of the things that we do, but also just looking online, you can look up historic weather. You can look up what your energy usage has been. And you can start to do these investigations now and work out, what do people want to do differently? How much does the school want to invest in helping themselves save money? How can the students also help drive that, and what can the students take home? Now, some of the other things about bringing in kind of climate change education is also about digital making. So what kind of things can students make and do with modern electronics to help reduce kind of consumption? Now, we love providing digital making. It's a great way for kids and students to get kind of hands-on and start to create and build and develop stuff. Now, one of the big parts of climate change is bringing in renewable energy sources, such as, like wind turbines, water wheels, and stuff like this. Now, these are projects that students can actually make and design and build themselves. They can build a small wind turbine to generate electricity to charge their smartphone. So rather than plugging their smartphone into the wall, they could use a wind turbine, they could use a water wheel. And some of these things you can actually make themselves. And this is where you can start to bring in STEM and cross-curricular activities. There's D&T, there's kind of design work here, there's things like 3D printing, there's electronics, and depending how far you want to go, you can bring in computer science and coding and programming. And this is all starting to come back into of creating these well-rounded students that have a good knowledge about climate change and actually renewable energies and really how they work and how they can be implemented. There's lots of investigations that need to be done here. Some of the things as well, depending on levels, for secondary school, it's quite a wide variance of abilities from year 7 kind of just getting going and all the way up to GCSEs and potentially A levels with sixth forms. So one of the things that we have typically done as like a starter is just a really basic temperature gauge. So you've got to build something that shows what the temperature is. Now this involves things like planning, designing, electronics. We use the BBC microbit, which is a very good way to kind of get coding, get going. It involves building, learning about inputs, outputs, coding, and also testing at the end. So you can really start to create these well-rounded cross-curriculum activities. And here we have an example design that someone's made. So there's been designed in some 3D software, so it's learning and using computer skills. It's been 3D printed, so you've got some modern technology that they're using. How can you use 3D printing to help achieve some of these goals? And depending on the level that you want, it can involve painting, decorating a fun activity for that, and then some basic electronics. You've got to wire it up using the BBC and this Micromaker board. So it starts to bring in some activities that you can start to do already with your students and bringing in ways how they could bring in climate change. So like with this temperature gauge, for example, you can create a green area that shows, oh, the room's quite good, but if it goes into the red, for example, you're like, look, we need to turn our heating off, this room's getting too hot, or other sort of aspects like that. Oh, why is this room too hot, the heating's off? Oh, we've got a load of electronic devices that are on that don't need to be on. So you can start to create these really simple things that just get students thinking about, well, why is it hot? What do we need to do? And you can use it for any sorts of things. You can do light, CO2, all sorts of other environmental aspects. Now, we've just covered some examples. One of the main things is, how do you actually integrate these into your subjects? You've got to meet your curriculum in your school to be able to achieve this. Now, this is where the climate change education is quite important, which is why in the UK they're creating a whole new GCSE, because it's hard sometimes to fit in some of these things into existing curriculums. Now, as I've discussed a few times, STEM, I'm sure a lot of people here have heard of STEM, but it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So it's all about creating projects that cover these numerous bases. So in regards to some of these topics that we've discussed, there's scientific investigations using correct methodology, research into power, current, voltage, wattage, incorporating things like physics into some of these projects. Now we've got, technology, D&T, and kind of computer science, the creation of a wind turbine, you've got 3D design, you've got woodworking and metalwork. If you are going to get students to create some of these renewable energies, it's what are they going to make? What skills do they need to make it? And then you've got computer science. So you've got software design, controlling and coding, and how do you control a wind turbine and things like that. How smart do you make your wind turbine? How safe do you make it? How might you measure the amount of energy it produces? So being able to measure how much energy it produces can help you refine your wind turbine. How efficient is it being? How good is the design? And then you've got linking into engineering. So you've got, how does wind flow? How does wind behave? What is needed to kind of design and build an efficient one? you know, what is blade design? And then you've got all some of like the testing and modeling tools around it that you can incorporate. And then you've also got maths involved in this. So what's the efficiencies? What's kind of like the speed, the power generations, the efficiency? What's the cost of making it versus how much is it going to save you? What sort of maths do you need to kind of work this out in safe distances? So it's applying some of the maths that students should be learning or should know, and applying that into the real world, and creating these renewable energy sources to help reduce climate change. Now, you've also got topics like geography that this can integrate into. A lot of times with some of these renewable energies, it's looking at what are the right locations. You know, obviously you want to install wind turbine in windy locations, but not too windy. If it's too windy, it can be detrimental to wind turbines where they have to be shut off. And just the same as solar panels, you need a sunny location. You don't want to put it in a shaded location. So it's looking at what are the geographic factors that create windy locations. Where might schools have suitable locations? Investigations into wind and the local environment. So really what creates some of the wind, what creates nice weather. So it's all this sort of things that you can start to incorporate into these potential quite large projects that can come across multiple curriculums. Like in geography here in the UK, I know when I did it, we did have to study and look into weather systems. Yes, it was at quite a basic level, it's only secondary, but you can still incorporate that of, well, what is the weather system in your local environment? And what do you learn from the textbook, and then apply it in the real world? And then how can you incorporate what you've learned and bring it into sustainable energies, renewable energies? And also some of the things that I find is not always necessarily discussed in some of the STEM activities, but it's the business. You know, some of these clean energy things are quite tricky because they have a lot of upfront costs, but can't necessarily compete with oil at the moment with some of these like biofuels and other things like that. So bringing in the business side to make projects commercially viable is you've got things like cost benefit analysis. So what's the investment in buying wind turbines, building wind turbines? You know, how much does it cost? Solar energy as well. You know, what's the kind of cost and investment? And what would the school be looking to save in 1, 3, 5, 10 years time? Just as when you invest in insulation in your house, you've got a bit of an upfront cost, but what's going to be your saving down the road? And that's where you can bring in some of your business curriculum. If you're teaching things like business studies and other subjects similar to that, you can get students as part of that as they're learning cost benefit analysis. Well, here's a use case. The school had, say, X amount of land, you got the solar panels, how much energy do they produce with the land? Here's how much solar energy was at that location. How much will it cost? How much will they save in 5 years time, 10 years time, 20 years time, and so on. So that's very important from a commercial kind of viable side, with trying to encourage schools and students to adopt these technologies. And this is where students will then have the extra knowledge going forward of going into the real world if they're trying to work on climate change, because they know how this stuff works. They know how it can be applied in the business world, and they know how people can save money from it. Now, as mentioned before, at secondary school and potentially younger and older, you've got massive varying levels of target age groups and also abilities within those age groups. So how do you integrate some of it? So you can have varying levels of complexity to meet your target age. So how much of a project are the students going to be running themselves versus how much information they're given to start with? So you can adapt your project for different abilities, even though they might be completing the same thing, but it's how much information you give them throughout the stages, versus if you've got a very capable student who might just need, right, this is what we want you to do, and then you help guide them, versus some that might need to be a little bit more spoon-fed of, oh, here's something that you might need to do, or won't you try this next? And then you've got things like varying levels of completed work, such as examples design. So like I showed you earlier on, the design of the temperature gauge. Now, one of the things we like to do at ScienceScope is provide an example design that isn't perfect. It's got issues with it, because then you show a student and a kid it and go, how would you improve this? And it gets their creative thinking working. Whereas if you create a really good design, I mean, no, some designs are close to perfect, but not many ever are. but it helps them think about, oh yeah, we could move that, adjust that, and do this. Whereas some students might really quite struggle with trying to think that way. So at least they've got something to get going, to build and make and get working. Whereas some of the advanced students will look at that and go, oh, that's not very good, I'm going to do it this way. And then they come up and they create their own. And as always with some of these projects, you need to give them research topics. So, you know, get them looking into how does wind turbine work, how do solar panels work, you know, what are the key factors, what's kind of energy levels do they produce. And this is where you can give them a list of research topics. So you as an educator can give them a list of topics which you know will give them the answer, which you might do at some of the younger ages or some of the students who might struggle more with these subjects, or the ones who might excel at it. You can just go, right, go research wind turbines, let's see what you've got, give me a presentation back and let's see where you've got, and you might need to guide them after that or might not. And then some of these activities can branch out into other things to help with climate change and educational resources. So getting students at high levels to create materials and devices to help with learning at the younger ages. So you can also get them to help with some of their projects that they've done for maybe like GCSE projects or things like A-level potential projects, and show them to like year 7s coming in of going like, oh, look, this is some of the stuff that you're learning. This is some of the stuff that you'll be working on. And then finally, it's also about driving change within your school as well. It's about bringing in policies and changes. And as part of that, you can do things like a group work or individual projects where actually students can present to the teachers. One of the partner schools that we've worked with at the computer science department, they do a project as a group with some code and activity, and they do a presentation about, well, what was their question, what was their problem they were trying to solve, what was their plan and what was their design, and do a little demonstration at the end. And you can do all sorts of things like that as well, where you can either do it individually or you can do it, some of these things as a group. And this really kind of covers some of the things that we've done as ScienceScope with some of the schools and some of the projects and how we can integrate it, but also what the UK government is doing. But also you don't necessarily need to wait for governments to enact change. You know, you can make a start on it now. You can apply them to your curriculum now. So that's something I've got to talk about here. So thank you all for listening, and I'll hand you back over.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to summarize some of the things that Josh has been talking about. We've gone into quite a lot of detail about the kinds of things you can do in a school. I think one of the things that I feel most passionate about with the whole climate change issue is that it really needs to be seen as a holistic whole. I'm concerned on a national and international level that we have a tendency to think of specific problems. You know, we're using too much oil to create too much CO2. We're worried about the environment as we get to school because there's so many polluting vehicles around. And sadly, quite a lot of these things are sort of not compatible with each other. So we have to try and find a way to make the world a better place, a more sustainable place, where we have to have some compromises. We've all experienced COVID as a really serious challenge to society. Let's all open the windows to make sure we don't get COVID, and let, in the UK, certainly in the winter, let the heat out and increase the cost of fuel and energy. You know, these kinds of challenges are a really serious problem that are not easily solved, even if we had solutions to the individual components. And what I think we need to do is to get young people to really understand the whole scale and scope of all of the problems associated with climate change, the environment, and sustainability, so that we move forward in a managed and, you know, as an effective way as we possibly can. I think the other thing that we really want to do is inspire young people to be the solution, not just to learn about other people's ways of solving problems, but to actually make major contributions to solving the problems. And if we don't start early, we're not going to succeed. We really need young people to engage in the problem. I think it's really fascinating. The statistics came out of the UK on this, you know, even 3 or 4 years ago, when attitudes were a little bit different then. They've moved on quite a lot. Huge percentage of kids really wanting to understand about this stuff. It's not simple. There are no simple solutions. We need to engage in education as a whole and get education to recognize that it's probably the most significant challenge we've all got for our lifetimes, and making solutions has to come from those people who are going through school today.
Thank you, David. I think you have said it really well. Now is the time when educators and, you know, different stakeholders, we all need to come together to support each other and really focus on how you know, we can innovate teaching and learning so that these important issues like climate change education can be integrated really successfully and effectively at the secondary education level. And thank you so much to Ms. Grażyna Polowoska as well, who introduced climate change and different aspects of climate change in a really simple and easy way. So now we open the floor for question and answer. Looking at the time, our apologies that we went a little over time, but we hope that that's okay, since you know, the information was really crucial. So maybe we can take a few questions. Those of you who need to leave, we understand, but if you could stick around for a few more minutes for the question and answer session, we'll really appreciate it. So if you have a question, you can click the reaction button and raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and start speaking. Seems like everyone is very quiet. So
for me, I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you, because I'm Hannah Dakhel. I come from Luxembourg, and I've been working on an interdisciplinary project. So when you talk about this holistic approach, when you talk about integrating this environment issue and connected with other subjects as well, I think it gives this an extra depth, because as you said, students have to solve problems in order to understand this issue. It's easy for us to come and tell them, okay, this is this is the problem, these are the solutions. But if they don't by themselves propose new solutions and integrate this subject with other subjects as well, not only science, because science education is important for them, but it's important that they connect it to other subjects as well. So I think it's very, very important to connect everything related to the environment, but to connect it as well to learning in other subjects. So thank you so much. This was really, really insightful.
Thank you, Hanadi. So I think David would agree that we did a great project where we connected, you know, different aspects of subject coming from literature, science, mathematics, and physics, chemistry, for a project called V4IoT. So if David, I don't know if you'd like to share something about how we approached that, you know, took that interdisciplinary approach to address that.
Absolutely. I thought it was truly inspiring, and actually it's something I've experienced before, but you know, we mustn't see this as a science problem. It is not a science problem. Actually, it's a human psychology problem as much as it's a science problem. And, you know, getting English teachers to engage in these sorts of scientific issues, because some of the technical stuff, well, the technical stuff is often scientific or engineering or whatever. But if we, I keep coming back to the point, and it's been made by the lady just now, you know, we've got to see this as a holistic problem. If I have one concern about secondary education in particular, certainly in the UK, it's that everything becomes siloed, and it's siloed for, I think, principally the reason that it makes it easier to examine, easier to test whether someone has got to a point. Now, I'm not saying that isn't important, but it means that you separate problems out into individual components. It's a bit like trying to make a watch with all the bits you need to make a watch. If you haven't got a set of instructions to make the watch, actually making a watch is unbelievably hard. We've got lots and lots of bits of the solution in science, in English, in business studies, in maths. But if we don't bring them all together and say, actually, the solution is a combination of all of these things, we've got to build a solution which is based on all aspects of it, then we don't get to a solution. Education, rightly to some extent, does separate it out into parts, but we need a way in education of bringing it all together so that kids see that confluence of all the information they've got. And I made it a point before, but I'll make it again because I think it is important. Some of those solutions that come out of those components actually conflict with each other. So you then have the really hard problem of saying, is it better to do this or to do that? And that's where the real challenges lie, where there's a conflict. Or does that conflict say, oh, let's think of another solution where the conflict doesn't exist?
Thank you, David. Does anyone else have any question, any concluding remarks from Josh or Gina and Angie? Or from participants, you as well, if you have any concluding remarks or any comments at all.
Can I just
Yes.
express in general the hope for the better future? I'm sorry, I sometimes maybe sound a little bit like I believe in magic. However, I spent my 20s and 30s working with young people, but also with teachers in Polish and German coordination. It was called Polnisches Deutsches Jugendwerk, when we were looking into how to integrate different aspects and how to educate people connecting different perspectives. And I just think the intercultural programs that gather different people and under one umbrella of the global issues and excellent experts, thanks to the internet that we can do such programs, it really makes a difference. And then upskilling in the regions is only possible thanks to all of you, all educators, but also people that want to learn and want to do more. So I am always delighted to take part in initiatives like this, and thank you so much for making such a huge effort to stay with us and try to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you so much. So with such inspiring concluding remarks from Gina, we end our session today. So before you go, I'll just quickly, I want to share my screen for the next session. So what's next? We have the third thematic webinar, that is methodology for integrating education for sustainable development and climate change education in teaching practices. It will be delivered by Ms. Eno Nakamura and Ms. Yoko Yuto from an organization called DEAR, Development Education Association and Research Center from Japan. And it will take place next Tuesday, 18th of October, between Singapore time, 4 to 5:30 p.m. So with that, thank you, everyone. And we will see you during next session. Have a lovely evening in Asia and a lovely afternoon in Europe. Thank you.